Hello all, welcome to English 3, English 103, Advanced Composition. I'm your professor, Professor Andrade, and we wanted to continue our discussion of mass media theories today. We want to pick up where we left off in our previous lecture and discussion, which is on the types of theories and how historically theory itself developed. And we talked earlier about positivist theory, which is the theories that come from science, that are involved in the scientific method, that date back to Isaac Newton and how fast does an apple fall out of a tree? Those kinds of questions and those kinds of propositions and assertions. Um, and then we also talked about the post-positivist theories, including normative, hermeneutic, and critical theories, which were responses to positivists. Were trying to be like positivism in some ways, um, in being able to reproduce its results and so on and so forth. To be able to reproduce results, to be able to pass on through particular phrasing and assertions and statements, uh, general knowledge about how things work or how the world works or how and why particular phenomena occur. So the positivists and the post-positivists wanted to be able to do that. Um, and we want to then break this down and talk about how, all right, so positivism was responded to in terms of the social sciences by the production of normative theories and hermeneutic theories, and of course, critical theories. Um, um, But media theory itself comes along at a time and it's going to mix both the positivist and the post-positivist. It just depends on the discourse surrounding the particular theory. Um, uh, so to begin with, let's break down the types of media theory. This would be a media taxonomy. This would be a theoretical taxonomy. What types of theories, what classes or categories of theories are available to us if we study the mass media? Because it's not just studying one thing. It's studying one thing, but from particular perspectives with particular interests in mind. So let's start then by just pointing out one area of argument, of theory that goes on is what are classes and types of media? What is the distinction between social media and mass media, and how did they join together? How are they joined, or what marks the distinctions between them? Um, this would be critical taxonomic knowledge, and as we'll see with all five of these uh, areas of theory, it's hot topic. There's journal articles written by and for experts about these topics, about media taxonomy, about effects, and so on and so forth. Um, so media taxonomy is one type. Another type of theory that we'll be looking at fairly extensively is media effects theory. Media effects theory looks to understand what media does to human beings. It's literally media effect. We can make an upfront division for you and point out that some media effects theories are media power theories or source power theories, meaning the source is the most powerful mechanism in the whole relationship between receiver and source. Or there's the limited effects theory, which says that, which more goes not too limited as far as like, oh, who gives a shit? It's limited. No. Folks who believe in the who preach the, if you will, preach the media, the limited effects theories will point out that like television has a habit of warping us, that the more local TV news that you watch, for instance, and this is an absolutely important limited effects theory, the more local news you watch, the more afraid you are of crime. This is a limited effect. just changes your mind about crime. But then you can also see that there would be ramifications, particularly in the United States, ramifications for prejudice and racism, and so on and so forth. So what you'd want to recognize here is that there are two types of media theories. One says that that the sources are all powerful, and the other says that sources are powerful and they warp us in subtle but dangerous ways. Okay. There's also something called media functions theory. A media function theory is about what does media do? What's its habitat? What's its function? Um, why do we need it? These are media function questions. In what ways is it needed? What performances does it do for us? What does it perform for us? These are all media function questions, and there's theories and arguments within mass media and sociology departments. Um, then there's media process theories, and media process theories are about how the media works. These tend to be normative theories. How does a free press work? How does a newspaper work? How does a story on the 5 o'clock news on Channel 4 end up there when there's only 22 minutes of material of empty space to fill? This is media process theory. And then finally, there's the one that turns the media power theories on their head. These are the hermeneutic theories of reception, which indicates that the power is on the other end, not at the source end, but at the audience end. Whatever relationship between source and audience with message thrown in there, whatever relationship that is sort of established in theories like propaganda theory. The first theory we'll hear about was a media power theory. The source tells everybody what to do. It orders them around. It provides a message, and the audience reacts. In hermeneutic theory, the audience the hermeneutic theory begins with the basic recognition that audiences must read messages, that messages aren't just injected whole into their bloodstream, but that actually they must recognize them and be able to read them and make sense of them. These theories, these hermeneutic theories, including semiotics, which we're going to study in some detail here going forward, these are, again, a response to particularly media effects theory and the holes in those particular theories, and there are holes. So what we want to deal with is the establishment, evolution, and diversification of media effects theory. Let's start there. That, pardon the sirens in the background. We want to talk particularly about media effects theory as this, you see here, the second one on my list, my taxonomic list. Taxonomy, practice of classification of things and concepts. So this is a media taxonomy. The first formal mass media effects theory, and it's going to occur because people take it very seriously. Thinkers take it seriously. Academics take it seriously. Business takes it seriously. Political science fans and politicians take it very seriously. And it's the first mass media theory. It's born at a particular moment. It's born at Halloween in 1938. See, at Halloween in 1938, Mercury Theater of the Air radio network presented a live play called The War of the Worlds. It was a reenactment of the same story you saw that Tom Cruise was recently in. No, was it Tom Cruise? Yes, it was. It was Tom Cruise. I'm getting my my stars mixed up in my head. All right, so this radio production beamed to millions of radio receivers across the United States uh, during the dinner hour, uh, performed, in other words, put on a play in which Martians attacked New Jersey. This caused a public panic. This broadcast, as it occurred, led people to do extreme things in states of panic, like there are stories of people packing up their cars in New York City and fleeing, people calling the police departments to report mysterious incidences and people were hiding under their beds. So something happened on October 30th, 1938, and it shook people up. The response, of course, was multilateral. Multiple groups were looking at this with interest. It was not, this is the earliest media effects theory, but there were worries and conjectures going back centuries about the mass media. There is a relationship between the Gutenberg press producing written materials and the spreading of literacy across Europe in the 15th century and the 16th century Reformation, because during the Reformation, all those literate Europeans wanted to be able to read the Bible on their own. And the Catholic Church at the time, before it split into Lutheranism, during the Reformation, the Catholic Church did all of their masses in Latin, of course. So we see here that there is some relationship, some thought put into this idea that people reading things make trouble, good trouble, bad trouble. They make trouble. There were also yellow journalism fears in the 1890s, fears that journalism could, and newspapers in particular, could stir up actual wars, as in the Spanish American War and the Hearst newspapers in the 1890s. And then there was, of course, the fear of corruption with children and movie theaters and in the silent and early talkie years, 19 teens, 1920s, 1930s. There's always been a panic about the damage that pornography can cause. But since man has been taking pictures, since man has been filming things, there has been pornography. And of course, it has always caused worries about its impact. All right. So, what exactly is this theory? It can be spelled out in this way with three variables. Check it out. Propaganda theory is defined as mass media has direct, immediate, and powerful effect on the masses. There are three variables here. The mass media, direct, immediate, let's try it again. The three variables are direct, and they're numbered here, I'm kind of blind, direct, immediate, and powerful effects on the masses. Okay. So this declares that in trying to understand why people panic by war while being exposed to War of the Worlds, this radio play of Martians invading in 1938, the first thought was that the first theory was that media can do three things to us, big us, the masses. It can have a direct, immediate, and powerful effect. So it fundamentally changes us. Us being exposed to it is going to change us fundamentally as a mass. Okay? We could diagram this. We could diagram it across as source produces message, which is delivered to the audience. Okay? Source delivers message, which is delivered to the audience. I may want to point out to you that the promise of the source here in this diagram, please forgive the QWERTY version of the diagram here. You see what I'm trying to do. But maybe we don't want to go across. Maybe we want to go source as, because source is so primary here. It's where everything starts. If the source ain't talking, there's no message. And supposedly there, I suppose, there's no audience. So let's work with this. Source produces message, which is delivered to the audience. We can refer to this, and it's thought of as, this theory is thought of as a stalagmite theory. You know, caves and stalagmites. And stalagmites are the ones that drip from the ceiling. And they drip from the ceiling onto the floor. And on the floor, they build up and up and up. And the stalagmite is one of those that grows directly out of the floor. And so this is kind of what this is, that sources drip messages onto our heads. There are other names for this. Magic bullet theory, because the source shoots a message which is internalized by the audience. I want us to notice that dynamic between message and audience. It's basically just internalization. There's a lot of ambiguity and downright confusion in what goes on between message and audience here. We're going to undertake a thorough bashing of this theory in a moment. But just let's recognize what it does. It recognizes, and if you want to call it magic bullet theory, you can call it magic bullet theory. It's also been called hypodermic needle theory, which again, this is because it's the 1930s. It's the first real era of inoculations, so people are getting shots. And here it is. It's like the message, the source shoots the message into the audience like a needle shoots a flu shot. Okay. So within our source, within our within our propaganda theory, we want to recognize that there are three variables here. There's the source variable, there's the message variable, and there's the audience variable. That's where we'd plug data in. That's where we'd plug in the phenomena or the data in any of those three spots. Source, who's saying it? What's the source? Message, what is being said? Something that has to be delivered, right? A letter or a shot or a gunshot, an inoculation. What's being delivered? And finally, the audience, who receives. Please recognize that this refers to a mass reception, undifferentiated receivers. Okay, so let's get back to our fundamental question. Why did some listeners to the War of the Worlds broadcast of 1938 panic about an alien invasion after being exposed to the radio play? Let's recognize certain social and historical pressures, some moments that really, look, let's talk about some things going on at the time that may have contributed in some way to this panic. I want us to notice that individually as well as altogether, none of these are sufficient by itself or in junction with any of the others to make a panic. Otherwise, there would have been a panic in 2011, the day before Halloween. Or yeah, what's go any pick a date, pick a year, and pick Halloween. So, for instance, right off the bat, if we want to talk about background conditions, which don't really rise to much more than an introduction or a concluding paragraph, none of this stuff belongs in anything other than that. We'll explain why. But to begin with, let's just talk about this historical moment. Look, if we're talking about context, we should point out that this broadcast did occur the night before Halloween. I don't know how much you want to make of that. Like I said, don't think it belongs in anything other than an intro or conclusion. Certainly not a body worthy kind of point that people get scared because of scary messages around Halloween. It's just patently too general and too obvious. But yes, it could have played a sort of background role. It could have been one of the background conditions that led to this panic. If the radio show had occurred on November 15th, it may not have caused the panic. You can't completely rule it out, but you can also say, well, it wasn't just Halloween that made people panic. On a more broad historical note, this is the era we refer to as the totalitarian era, the era of Hitler and Imperial Japan and Mussolini. And one of the reasons why this particular theory, propaganda theory, comes in so handy is because human beings around the world, people who are watching and looking and studying fascism and poli-sci, are recognizing that the Nazis have been very, very good at controlling the German people, as the Imperial Japan has too. People, as the rulers of Imperial Japan did too. And what's striking is their relationship with the mass media. The Nazis, one of their first acts was to seize control of radio and the movie studios. There was no television at the time, or television was really, really early. But what was the relationship between the slavish devotion of the people to these fascists and the control of the media by the fascists, right? This would be an area of interest if we were looking at what the energy was to believe these theories. Okay. Also in the background, working like background radiation, these are background conditions. This is the Great Depression. I think it's one of the lulls in the Great Depression. No, 38 was one of the worst years. It looked like there was another downturn in 38. I recall, as if I'm recalling that correctly. But this is the time of the Great Depression. And you can make the argument that people are sensitive, receptive to messages about social dangers when society itself seems to fall apart. I mean, the Great Depression had 40% unemployment. There was no unemployment benefits. There was no welfare. There was no food stamps. There was no social security. So this was a time of great upheaval and fear. And perhaps we want to take a notice of the Great Depression to be thinking about that as a background condition for this panic, if we're thinking about why people panic. Now, this is also, for the first time, America and the world is experiencing advertising. That for the first time, you could turn on your favorite radio show, and what's it'll contain program, but it'll also contain advertisement. And it looks to us as it looked to them as it looks to us now, that these are two separate things. And here we go. What's an advertisement? What's a good advertisement? If an advertisement works the way propaganda theory declares it works, boy, we're going to get really rich if we're in the selling things business. Um, Another reason for the boom here in for the boom in this particular theory and why it became popular is because for the first time in the 1930s, applied psychology and sociology programs were really taking off on campus. And these are sociological and applied psychological questions that we're dealing with here. How do people do this? Why do people do this? What is with these reactions? These are all sociological questions. Um, we also want to recognize that for a lot of theorists, there have been advances in medicine that seem to concretize certain values and beliefs. That's a terrible way of explaining that. For the first time, medical science could get inside your body and change it. And with a shot, you won't get sick. You won't get yellow fever. You won't get rabies or whatever it is. This is this profound moment in human evolution where medicine is changing human lives and changing its behavior. And not only that, in the psychological realm, in the realms of psychology with psychologists and so on and so forth, people like Freud are out of favor. The early psychoanalysis has faded. Freud will come back and preach psychoanalysis, and it'll come back again in the 30s, and then it'll come back again in the 60s, and so on and so forth. But at the time, the psychological craze is when you know about. And this psychological craze was kind of coming to an end, but nothing had replaced it yet. That psychological insight involved Pavlov and his dogs. If we're dealing in why did human beings panic when they heard this radio play about Martians invading? Are we not asking the same questions that Pavlov was asking when he said, I can ring this bell whenever I feed my dogs, and pretty soon they'll start salivating when I ring my bell. And if I'm right about this, he wasn't. If I'm right about this, we'll see that the dog's brains, after they've learned, have physically changed. After they've learned to recognize the bell, their bodies changed. Not just their brains, or salivary glands will have changed as well. This is called biological determinism, and it's not working out. Pavlov's dogs, they got lots of post-death brain surgery, and Pavlov could never highlight a single physical change in a dog's brain, and could never distinguish based on their exposure to this bell and food system. Additionally, at this time, Vladimir Lenin, the head of communist Russia, he dies in 1923 or 1924, and the Soviets are so in love with Pavlov's ideas that they take Lenin's brain and they slice it into 7,500 slices, with the idea being that it would show his greatness. What they found was it was just a normal brain. So we're not seeing we're not seeing what behaviorism taught, but the determinism of mass media has a direct, immediate, and powerful effect on the masses. The determinism of that is very appealing psychologically in a world where this kind of thinking isn't quite dying, is dying out, but not quite dead. So the energy then to keep this theory going keeps that births this theory and then provides insight into it. These are people like poli-sci students, folks who are democratic idealists, who worry about the fragility of democracy in a world full of Nazis and fake news and so on and so forth. And then, of course, Nazis are interested in this theory. Totalitarians in general would be interested in this theory, all of which would be giving it energy. This next one, the communications department, same deal. For the first time on campuses like sociology, you have communications departments opening up. And they're not exactly begging for material to analyze. They're just broadly looking at communications. And it occurs to them that, well, mass media is a form of communication. In these departments, you'll find marketing specialists and public relations specialists. And of course, they're interested in propaganda theory. Psychologists, but especially behaviorists, are energizing this. Like I said, it's another pursuit of the physical side of psychology, of the structural side of psychology. Messages change human brains. Literally, that's kind of what it says. Literally and kind of, sorry about that. That's what it basically says. Law, of course, is interested in this in terms of suing for damages. Some of those effects might be worthy of being sued, might be worthy of a law case. Incitement. If mass media can do this, can we convict bad people of incitement for taking it to the air and being on mass media? And then, of course, business management and economics students are interested in this as well. So they're all energizing this particular theory. It is the first step. We're going to find that this theory is problematic, that there are so many problems with it. It's basically going to be a joke by the time I finish with it. And I want you to take that seriously. I want you to be thinking about the relationship between, and this is very personal for you, the relationship between reading a paragraph, understanding it, and believing it. The difference between understanding and believing. For a lot of Americans, this is an American mental habit. I'm not the first one to point this out. I can't remember exactly who pointed it out the first time. But Americans move very quickly from understanding to believing. If they can understand it, it must be true. We've got to be very careful about this. Look, we can all understand this three-step flow. Source presents message to the audience. We can all understand that. But in that, we have to recognize that that doesn't necessarily make it worthy of belief, worthy of taking seriously, worthy of faith, worthy of formalized theory. So look, let's recognize SMA is brilliant in its simplicity. It's a great model, but one thing, it falls way short of import, insight, and academic worthiness. If you're really paying attention, You will understand it, but you will not believe it. In fact, propaganda is, let's put it this way, propaganda theory is straight up bullshit. Can you use it, for instance, to explain exactly why the audience panicked during the War of the Worlds broadcast? No, you can't. Why? It's too poorly constructed. 3 variables is not enough variables. What do I mean? Well, for instance, source. If I'm to examine War of the Worlds broadcast, who's the source? If I'm to use these terms, these variables, who's the source? Is it Orson Welles? Is it the radio play itself, the one that they read from pages? Is it the radio station? Is it the network? This doesn't seem right. And it's too vague. So, message. Here we go. The way propaganda theory speaks of message or thinks of message, it's like instructions. Like the dog ringing like ringing the bell for the dog to make him salivate. But messages don't work that way. I've seen tens of thousands of murders in my life, probably. Yeah, on television. I never committed murder. You've all seen the similar numbers of deaths. What's the message there? I'm watching a scene where somebody shoots somebody because they're mad at them. What's the message? Oh gosh, how do you break that down? And then audience. Well, I'm hinting at it here. The audience here is they're just passive sponges. There's no reading, and there's no activity on their part other than intaking it. There's no processing of whatever message that was. Yeah, what was the message? That the Martians were invading, I guess would be it. Yeah, I guess that would be it. Too few variables. Source, the word source is vague. Message seems quite literal. And the audience is unrealistically passive and sponge-like. So we've reached the bottom of this discussion. I would like you to listen to the Mercury Theater of the Air presenting The War of the Worlds, the original 1938 broadcast. And I'd like you to listen to it with media effects theory in mind. What we're looking for here is a better explanation than propaganda theory. And it will start with what you notice. Well, let's dig into this. I want you to listen to this. I've provided the link. There it is. In our next program, we will be reviewing the early part of that, and I'll be sharing some of your thoughts as well as some of mine on this fundamental question. I ask it 3 different ways, but it's the same question. What is within this radio show that made listeners panic? What is in the radio program's behavior, its performance, that inspired listener panic? Or if you prefer, what did the panickers notice within the show? So now we're going to start accounting for the actual phenomena itself. We want to turn to what people were originally exposed to, rather than just theorize about Halloween and the Great Depression and the rise of the Nazis causing people to worry, and then worried people are more likely to panic. That's awful general. People worry all the time. I don't think we panic about Martian invasions all the time. So go ahead and jump into the thread. This is worth 25 points. I want you to tell me, after you've listened to some of the program, what people were responding to. What's within the show itself that would have caused people to panic. Okay. And I want you to jump into the reply here. You can't see anybody else's reply until you yourself reply. And it's worth 25 points. Let's get this done by next week, by Tuesday, the 23rd. Tuesday, the 23rd. You'll see it on the calendar. Yeah, and recognize these questions you're dealing in here, what's within the show, what's in the program's behavior, what are panickers noticing. None of this is called for if we are just working with the propaganda theory, if we're just working with what propaganda theory offers us as far as an equation, as far as a design. So post your answer. You can give me a couple of different things because it's not like they would notice one thing in isolation. Notice a couple of things. What makes them panic? What's in the show that's making them panic? We talked about the background conditions. Good. But what's in the show? What's in the show? So let's wrap up for the day. Your discussion thread is gone. I will post this onto YouTube, and in the discussion thread, I'll post it at the top of this very discussion thread, and we will see you around the bend.